Thank you. Before we come to First Minister's questions, members will wish to join me in welcoming to the gallery the head of the Palestinian Mission in the UK, Professor Manuel Hassashian. We now come to questions to the First Minister. Question number 1, Joanne Lamont.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what engagements is planned for the rest of the day.
First Minister.
Well, Deputy Presiding Officer, I'm sure the whole Chamber will join me in offering our sincere condolences to the family of Captain Walter Reid Barry of the Royal Scots Borderers 1st Battalion, the Royal Regiment of Scotland, who was tragically killed in Helmand Province, Afghanistan on Remembrance Sunday. It is clear from the many heartfelt tributes paid to Captain Barry in recent days, he was a popular, dedicated and widely respected soldier. As his body is returned to the islands today, he will be remembered as a fine example of the Scottish soldier, and the thoughts of the whole Parliament are with his family at this sad time.
Joanne Lamont.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and of course, as the First Minister so eloquently put it, we send our condolences to the family at this saddest of times. On the 28th of June of this year, the Cabinet Secretary for Education, Mike Russell, told this Chamber, and I quote, "There is no reduction in funding for colleges in financial year 2012-2013. He repeated, to applause from the SNP benches, unsurprisingly, "Presiding Officer, there is no reduction in funding for colleges in financial year 2012-2013. Was he right, or was he misleading the Parliament?
First Minister.
No, yes, he was correct. The funding position, resource funding for colleges, is $545 million in 2011-12, and in 2012-13 it's $546 million.
Joanne Lamont.
Well, while Mike Russell, of course, famously or perhaps notoriously was grasping for the thistle, it seems that the First Minister was grasping for an answer, unfortunately not a correct one. The truth is, you see, as we have found out from the Auditor General and from the Scottish Parliament's own Independent Information Centre, the Cabinet Secretary was in fact wrong. College budgets have been cut this year. In the light of these independently sourced facts, was Mike Russell right, or was he misleading Parliament?
First Minister.
I think $545 million resource budget to $546 million is, by definition, an increase in funding. I think, incidentally, that's about as exact an answer as anybody has ever given in any Parliament, and I can't imagine why Joanne Lamont read out something which was obviously pre-prepared. The Audit Scotland report, of course, as Joanne Lamont may or may not be aware, did not take account of the increases in funding which would be announced after the provisional budget, which is why, in that sense, the Audit Scotland report was out of date. But given, well, if it didn't take account of announcements that had been made, by definition, it's out of date. Now, it might well be that the Audit Scotland, because of the timing, are not responsible for that, but surely the Labour benches must be aware of it, because this is an issue to which they've devoted a great deal of time and attention. So, given the resource budget has increased to £546 million, at a time, incidentally, where the declines in the business budget for FE colleges south of the border have been declining dramatically, absolutely dramatically, then I think that does represent, in these extraordinarily difficult times, an increase of funding between these two financial years.
Joanne Lamont.
This week's white noise, but I have to say to the First Minister, in his pre-prepared but ill-advised defence of his minister, in weeks past we have seen the credibility of his backbenchers burned in defending him. He's ill-advised to burn his credibility in defending his education minister, because no matter how big the briefing in front of him, I have to tell him that not even Mike Russell believes Mike Russell anymore. Because in June of this year, in the official report of this Parliament, Mike Russell said there is no reduction in funding for colleges in financial year 2012-2013. Yet yesterday, He denied it. He told this chamber, and I quote, "I take the opportunity to say that I have never said there were no cuts." So, Mike Russell is saying, I never said what I said. Thank goodness it was being recorded on both occasions. For, of course, both these statements by Mike Russell cannot be right. The reality is that college budgets are being slashed. It is no longer a question of if Mike Russell misled Parliament, the question is when. And isn't misleading Parliament the kind of offence which would cost a minister his job?
First Minister.
Well, can I point out the two quotes? The first one referred to financial years 2011-12, the £545 million, and 2012-13, that's the £546 million. Revenue funding for colleges is projected to go to £512 million in 2013-14. That gives you the absolute reason why Mr Russell has factually reported the situation to Parliament. I should say that thanks to the investment in the regionalisation process and the NPD programme, that if you look at resource and capital over that period, then the budget goes from £590 million to £616 million. That's the investment that members will be aware and see across Scotland in the Forth Valley colleges, the Kilmarnock colleges, the Glasgow colleges, the Inverness colleges, which are transforming the infrastructure of the college sector in Scotland. So given that she now has these figures, and given they are perfectly compatible with what Mr Russell said in the chamber, perhaps Joanne Lamont will care to withdraw one of her many, many resignation calls.
Joanne Lamont.
In the world of SNP, when you can say whatever you like, whenever you like, regardless of what you said yesterday and what you're going to say tomorrow, presumably that qualifies as a credible answer. See, in the rest of the world, it makes no sense whatsoever. Just to remind the First Minister, Mr Russell said there were no cuts in 2012-2013. I'll repeat it. He said there will be no cuts in 2012-2013. Yesterday he said, I never said there weren't going to be any cuts. These two things don't match. And on the question of regionalisation, of course, the First Minister is well aware that the Auditor-General has said there has no case been made for it whatsoever. But it's not just this Parliament, and it would be serious enough if it were, but it's not just this Parliament that Mike Russell has misled. It's the people of Scotland, including the 100,000 young people who are out of work, who would benefit from a college sector being funded and invested in rather than being cut. Now, this week we found out that Mike Russell told a college chair, we know if the backbenchers are noisy, it's because they don't like hearing what is being said to them. And it would suit them better to ask hard questions themselves from time to time, rather than being background noise. Because this week, Mike Russell told a college chair he should resign because he no longer had any trust in him. Well, presiding officer, no one can have any trust in Mike Russell after this week. This week, we found out that Mike Russell told a college chair he would sack him if he had the power. But Mike Russell has misled this Parliament, and the First Minister has the power to sack him.
Ms Lamont,
Why won't he sack a minister? Why won't he sack a minister? Why won't he sack a minister who's denying our young people an opportunity to go to college, and when challenged about it, he misleads this Parliament?
First Minister.
Well, when Joanne Lamont has reached the stage of appealing for the SNP benches to do her job for her, then I think we have to ask the questions on her behalf. then I think we've got to the situation which reveals the full extent of her unwillingness to accept the facts that 545 million to 546 million is not a cut in funding. The projections for the future to 512 million is, but luckily the investment in capital gives hope for the colleges in terms of the regionalisation process. And in any comparison, the colleges, the universities of Scotland are being extraordinarily well funded in comparison with the colleges and universities south of the border. That is obvious, I'd say. And it should be a matter of some celebration for this chamber that we have a record number of Scottish full-time students at college and university this year in Scotland, despite the extraordinarily difficult financial circumstances. Now, I was rather expecting, I'm afraid, Joanne Lamont's course of questioning. You see, unfortunately for Joanne, Paul Sinclair had already tweeted the call for Mr Russell's resignation this morning. The demand, Mr Russell now exposed and he should now quit. So it wasn't the greatest surprise to me on earth that this should be repeated puppet-like by Joanne Lamont a few hours later. I have to also say that this adds to the long list and litany of resignation calls from the Labour Party to the government. They've called for the resignation of Kenny McCaskill, for John Swinney, for Nicola Sturgeon, Richard Lockhead, Fiona Hislop, Nicola Sturgeon again and Kenny McCaskill. The only person they haven't called for is my resignation. A totally extraordinary situation, but we'll wait for next week and no doubt Paul Sinclair will set Joanne Lamont right. The only difficulty about Paul Sinclair and turning the Labour Party into an extended version of Twitter is that other people tweet as well. And on the 1st of November, Ian Smart, prominent Labour blogger and former president of the Law Society of Scotland, wrote, and this is from a Labour source, if there is a more stupid, politically tone-deaf, possibly fifth columnist, political advisor than Paul Sinclair, then I've got to meet them. If that's what the Labour Party thinks about the Labour Party, then it's little wonder that this extension of Labour into one massive tweet does nothing for politics in this country.
Joanne Lamont.
Order. The First Minister is responsible for addressing the needs of the unemployed young people in this country. And the idea that a juvenile trawl through the tweets of this world is any kind of response is a complete disgrace to anyone in this place or anywhere else who believes themselves fit to represent the people of Scotland.
First Minister.
No, I'm not responsible for the juvenile tweets of Paul Sinclair. That is her responsibility. Our responsibility is to invest in the Scottish economy through the capital investment programme. Our responsibility is the record number of apprenticeships, 26,000 in the Scottish economy. Our responsibility is the small business bonus, which is helping small companies survive. And our responsibility is to get for this Parliament the economic powers that will allow us to take the country to prosperity and economic freedom.
Question number 2, Ruth Davidson. Order.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I would also like to associate myself and the entire Scottish Conservative Party with the remarks of the First Minister and pass on our condolences to the family of Captain Walter Reid Barry after the tragic events of Remembrance Day, and to ask the First Minister when he'll next meet the Secretary of State for Scotland.
First Minister.
I thank Ruth Davidson for making it clear the whole Parliament endorses the remarks. I have no plans to meet the Secretary of State in the near future.
Ruth Davidson.
Deputy Presiding Officer, yesterday we heard the Education Secretary ignore the impact of SNP policies on Scotland's colleges as simply getting rid of what he arrogantly dismissed as hobby courses. Well, here are a few examples of the courses that are now no longer available under his stewardship. HNC in diagnostic imaging, gone. HND in human resource management, gone. HND in technical support, gone. HND in network computing, gone. Qualifications in healthcare and in nursing, gone. Mike Russell has labelled these subjects hobbies, and they are anything but. Will the First Minister instruct his Education Secretary to apologise for his insulting attitude to the thousands of ordinary people who are doing nothing but their best to improve their lives?
First Minister.
But as Ruth Davidson should know, the reason for the commitment in terms of full-time equivalent courses in colleges is to make sure that these courses, the courses that she's mentioned, we have maintained the number of students, indeed increased it from 2006 2007. The reason for measuring the full-time equivalent courses is quite simple. That the full-time equivalent values a year-long course, a full-time course, the courses that she's mentioned, in a proper way. It doesn't say it's the same thing as having a 3-month course or a 2-month course. That's why the full-time equivalent figure is incredibly important. And that's why, in terms of full-time equivalents, there is this year a record number of Scottish students at Scottish colleges and universities. If Ruth Davidson would care to glance south, she would say a dramatic decline in student numbers across the college and university sector in England. So if she was coming here with a programme and saying we are going to invest in colleges and universities and look at the tremendous record of our colleagues south of the border, she would have some credibility. But she is in no position. She is in no position to attack a situation where we have managed, under the most extreme financial pressure from our colleagues, to secure a record number of Scottish students in full-time courses at college and university in Scotland. I believe that is an achievement, and I believe it's a commitment to the young people of Scotland.
Ruth Davidson.
Well, let's ask the First Minister to take a look at the situation north of the border, because 70,000 fewer places here is not an illusion. It is the harsh reality and is part of the choices that this First Minister's Scottish Government is making. Now, he just said that he's delivering for Scottish colleges under, and I quote, severe financial pressure. Well, we on this side of the House accept that there has been a 6% real terms cut in the Scottish budget. We accept that. Still up in cash terms, we accept 6% in real terms. What he must accept is that a 24% cut to college budgets comes directly from him and not from Westminster. That is his responsibility. There are now 70,000 fewer opportunities for ordinary people to learn skills and help them get on. And as the unemployment gap grows between the rest of the UK and Scotland, these people need more opportunities, not fewer. The truth is, this First Minister is raising college budgets to fund the SNP's electoral bribe for free university places. It is little more than educational arrogance and snobbery. University good, solid college places bad. When will this First Minister finally admit that his priorities are damaging the chances of thousands of ordinary Scots?
First Minister.
I don't think snobbery is the strongest ground for the Conservative Party. Can we get back to the facts? I think, and let's do a direct comparison, because as Ruth Davidson well knows, that the position in Scotland in terms of finances for the time being is controlled by the budgets south of the border. Over the last few years, in the projections, the FE resource budget for colleges in England is going to decline from 4.4 billion to 3.2 billion, an extraordinary cut in nominal and in real terms. The position that she quoted in terms of the projection in Scotland was before Mr Swinney wisely was able to find more funds on the revised budget for the college sector this year. And the revenue budget, in terms of resource for colleges and student support, it goes from 545 million to 546 million in 2012-11. Compared to the situation south of the border, that is an extraordinary achievement. The intention to concentrate in full-time courses is, of course, because we are looking to secure employment for these youngsters. And the fact that we have a record number of our youngsters in full-time courses in colleges and universities in Scotland, against the dramatic declines that are taking place from her government south of the border, to me represents a substantial investment in our young people and a substantial achievement for this government under the most difficult circumstances. Now, Ruth Davidson's answer to this, as I understand it, her answer to looking for extra funding for the colleges of Scotland is to cut income tax in Scotland and offer another £1 billion reduction in the budget of Scotland. Well, that is what she appeared to say in her anniversary address when she spoke last week. So if she can ever reconcile what's happening in London at the present moment for English colleges with a much better position defended in Scotland, and reconcile her ambition to slash the revenue budget of Scotland even further with her calls for investment in Scotland's college sector, then she shall come to this chamber with a degree of credibility. And if she ever does come to a degree of credibility, then I won't care if the Conservative Party are snobbish or not.
A very brief constituency question from Jamie Hepburn.
Thank you, President Officer. The First Minister will be aware of the details emerging about the proposed merger between AG Bar and Britvic. It's been reported that some 500 jobs may be lost as a result of the merger out of a combined workforce of 4,000 between the two companies involved. Does the First Minister agree with me that it is incumbent on AG Bar to clarify as a matter of urgency what this means for the workforce and factory at their Cumbernauld site? First Minister.
The constituency member obviously raises an understandable and important constituency concern, and I hope that the company, as the merger process goes through, are able to explain in more detail the consequences for the workforce. The company is an extremely successful company. There's every reason to believe it will continue to be an extremely successful company, and I think everybody in Scotland will want that success to be shared by its workforce.
Question number 3, Stuart Maxwell.
To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's position is on the likely impact of the proposed job losses at BBC Scotland.
First Minister.
Well, this is a very important time for Scotland. It is vital that BBC Scotland maintains the highest standards of quality in reporting public debate. The Scottish Government continues to hold grave concerns over the ability to achieve this in the face of the job losses that are proposed and indeed the ones which have already happened. The Cabinet Secretary for Culture and I have regularly expressed our concerns to the BBC regarding the risks to their news and current affairs output. Now more than ever, I hope the BBC are able to heed these warnings.
Stuart Maxwell.
Thank you, President Officer. Can I thank the First Minister for that answer? The First Minister will be aware of the Newsnight report and the subsequent events that flowed from it, including the £450,000 payoff. In light of these events, does the First Minister feel it is appropriate for the BBC to continue with its disproportionate cuts to staff at BBC Scotland, particularly as these cuts will be detrimental to the BBC's ability to give wide coverage of the major events taking place in Scotland over the next few years?
First Minister.
Well, firstly, can I make the very important point that the crisis currently engulfing the BBC must not be allowed to obscure the underlying issues which relate to extremely serious allegations of abuse and exploitation of children, which, although they date back a number of years, must be properly investigated. This situation underlies serious and institutional failures of leadership at the BBC, which must, in my view, be immediately addressed. I've expressed my view publicly this morning that Greg Dyke is someone in whom the public would have confidence and trust when it comes to taking forward the corporation's own inquiries into that issue. But more than that, he was somebody who I think that journalists in the BBC would have great confidence in, as we remember the demonstrations which took place when he was unfairly evicted from the BBC some years ago. And an appointment such as that would be a good start in both restoring the reputation of the BBC, and I can speak from personal experience to the most recent Director General, who understood the commitment that our national broadcaster has to covering the full extent and range of political and current debate in Scotland.
Very briefly, David Stewart.
Presiding Officer, the loss of senior BBC editorial staff in the north may well see programmes driven from Pacific Quay rather than Plockton. Does the First Minister share my view that the BBC's responsibility is to represent all of Scotland, not just the Central Belt? First Minister.
I do agree with that, and I welcome it being raised again by the member. I had arranged a meeting with the new Director General to discuss that very point. Unfortunately, that meeting will have to take place with someone else now, but nonetheless, the important point behind the fact that as Scotland's national broadcaster, the BBC must serve all of the country is one that's well made by David Stewart and one which I support.
Question number 4, Stuart McMillan.
Thank you. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's assessment is of the economic impact in Scotland of the planned 3p increase in fuel duty.
First Minister.
Well, the increase in fuel duty would represent a £130 million tax rise for Scottish households and businesses, at a time when Scottish motorists are already facing some of the highest fuel costs in Europe. This rise will serve to undermine economic recovery. Recent research by the National Institute of Economic and Social Research shows that, as well as presenting a tax rise on households and businesses, the increase in fuel duty could cost up to 50,000 jobs across the United Kingdom.
Stuart McMillan.
I thank the First Minister for that response. The FSB has warned that 79% of its members say fuel prices are having a damaging effect on their business, and 62% say they are having to increase their prices as a result. In a week when inflation has increased again and the Bank of England has cut its forecast for economic growth, would the First Minister agree that the Chancellor should listen to households and businesses, cancel the 3p rise and put fuel prices on a stable footing with a proper fuel duty regulator?
First Minister.
Well, it should be noted that fuel prices, the pre-tax prices of petrol and diesel are among the lowest and second lowest in Europe, but UK prices at the pump are among the highest in Europe. The Treasury now takes 81 pence per litre in VAT and fuel duty, contributing to inflation and threatening, at this time in particular, damage to the economy. The Chancellor needs to take some key steps in a few days' time in the autumn budget. He needs to invest in growth, support recovery, increase substantially capital investment, and another step would be to cancel the fuel duty rise.
Question number 5, Lewis MacDonald.
To ask the First Minister what the purpose is of the Scottish Government's proposed changes to criminal legal aid.
First Minister.
Well, the purpose of the changes set out in the Scottish Civil Justice Council and Criminal Legal Assistance Bill is to introduce contributions to solicitors' fees and criminal legal aid where the client can afford to pay such contributions. Doing so will ensure parity between the different types of legal aid, and by delivering savings help maintain access to justice in what are economically very difficult times.
Lewis
In
MacDonald.
reference to parity, given that contributions under civil legal aid are collected centrally by the Scottish Legal Aid Board, will the First Minister undertake to establish the full costs to the Board of doing the same for contributions under criminal legal aid and instruct the Board to discuss those costs with representatives of the legal profession before the bill returns to the Chamber at stage 3?
First Minister.
Well, I thank Lewis MacDonald for his question. It would cost an estimated £600,000 for SLAB to collect summary contributions instead of solicitors. That would be a very significant sum when we face a situation that the budget for legal aid is being cut by 7.3%, which compares, of course, to a decline in England and Wales of 17%. The effort has been to maintain and stop these budget restrictions having a damaging impact on access to justice, with adverse consequences for other aspects of the justice system. That's what we're trying to do, and there is no doubt that the proposals would lead to a more efficient collection of the contributions. I also know that Lewis MacDonald will be well aware that when it comes to advice and assistance, preliminary work, guilty pleas, solicitors already collect clients' contributions. So that principle already exists within the existing system. And in these difficult times, I hope that everyone realises that trying to protect the basis of the legal aid system, it requires a system that works in the most efficient and economically viable way.
Question number 6, Christine Graham.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's position is on reports of a so-called turf war between the Chief Executive of the Scottish Police Authority and the Chief Constable for Scotland. First Minister.
Well, the Police and Fire Reform Scotland Act sets out clear roles and responsibilities for the Scottish Police Authority and the Chief Constable. It's for the SPA and the Chief Constable to decide how best to fulfil these responsibilities, and discussions are ongoing on the scope and functions that the SPA will deliver. The SPA has written to the Scottish Government setting out a framework through which decisions on this issue will be made by their board in consultation with the Chief Constable.
Christine Graham.
Can I thank the First Minister for his answer, as it is not seemly, to put it mildly, for this issue to be trailed in the media with alleged quarrels over who's to be in charge of backroom staffing and IT. Can the First Minister therefore confirm what he said about this framework? The demarcation of the functions of the SP and the Chief Constable will be resolved soon, and that we can be confident that operational policing is solely the responsibility and remit of the Chief Constable.
First Minister.
Well, I'm happy to say I believe that progress is being made on this issue. We've made it clear to the SPA that it must put in place a process to reach an agreed position in partnership with the Chief Constable. The Police and Fire Reform Act sets out clear roles and responsibilities, as I mentioned. It is for the SPA and Chief Constable how best to fulfil these responsibilities, but discussions are ongoing on the scope of functions which the SPA will deliver. No proposals have been submitted as yet, therefore no decisions have been taken, but it certainly won't act on the Chief Constable's operational independence.
Graham Pearson.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. In light of the response from the First Minister, will he, in short, acknowledge that this Parliament's intention in legislation was to deliver full operational independence to the incoming Chief Constable, and that any moves to limit that intention would be both unwelcome and unwarranted?
First Minister.
Well, as I've just said to the convener of the Justice Committee, these proposals will not impact on the Chief Constable's operational independence.
Briefly, Margaret MacDonald.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Well, in no way do I think that Parliament should interfere with the running or the management of the new police force. I do hope we have a chance to comment on the plans before they are put into effect, and I would like to know if there are plans that will take care of a Chief Constable who doesn't quite work out, being delicate about it.
First Minister.
Well, I know that Margaret MacDonald will never be short of opportunities to comment in this Parliament and elsewhere, but can I assure Margaret that I believe that progress is being made on this issue, and perhaps in order to facilitate even more comment, I shall write to Margot and keep her informed of the progress that's being made.
That ends First Minister's questions, and we now turn to the next item of business, and I'll allow a short pause to allow members who are not participating in the debate to leave the chamber quietly, and also for the public gallery to clear before we move on to members' business.